The Vampyre is a short work of prose fiction written in 1819 by John William Polidori. The work is often viewed as the progenitor of the romantic vampire genre of fantasy fiction. The work is described by Christopher Frayling as the first story successfully to fuse the disparate elements of vampirism into a coherent literary genre. Quote, character seeded. Lord Ruthven, a suave British nobleman. The vampire. Aubrey, a wealthy young gentleman. An orphan. Ianthe, a beautiful Greek woman Aubrey meets on his journeys with Ruthven, Aubrey's sister, who becomes engaged to the Earl of Marsden. Earl of Marsden, who is also Lord Ruthven, plotted it. Aubrey, a young Englishman, meets Lord Ruthven, a man of mysterious origins who has entered London society. Aubrey accompanies Ruthven to Rome, but leaves him after Ruthven seduces the daughter of a mutual acquaintance. Aubrey travels to Greece, where he becomes attracted to Ianthe, an innkeeper's daughter. Ianthe tells Aubrey about the legends of the vampire. Ruthven arrives at the scene and shortly thereafter Ianthe is killed by a vampire. Aubrey does not connect Ruthven with the murder and rejoins him in his travels. The pair is attacked by bandits and Ruthven is mortally wounded. Before he dies, Ruthven makes Aubrey swear an oath that he will not mention his death or anything else he knows about Ruthven for a year and a day. Looking back, Aubrey realizes that everyone whom Ruthven met ended up suffering. Aubrey returns to London and is amazed when Ruthven appears shortly thereafter, alive and well. Ruthven reminds Aubrey of his oath to keep his death a secret. Ruthven then begins to seduce Aubrey's sister while Aubrey, helpless to protect his sister, has a nervous breakdown. Ruthven and Aubrey's sister are engaged to marry on the day the oath ends. Just before he dies, Aubrey writes a letter to his sister revealing Ruthven's history, but it does not arrive in time. Ruthven marries Aubrey's sister. On the wedding night, she is discovered dead, drained of her blood, and Ruthven has vanished. Publication edit. The Vampyre was first published on 1 April 1819 by Henry Colburn in the New Monthly Magazine with The False Attribution, a tale by Lord Byron. The name of the work's protagonist, Lord Ruthven, added to this assumption, for that name was originally used in Lady Caroline Lamb's novel Glenarvan, from the same publisher, in which a thinly disguised Byron figure was also named Lord Ruthven. Despite repeated denials by Byron and Polidori, the authorship often went unclarified. The tale was first published in book form by Sherwood, Neely, and Jones in London, Paternoster Row. In 1819 in octavo as The Vampyre, a tale in 84 pages. The notation on the cover noted that it was entered at Stationers' Hall, March 27, 1819. Initially, the author was given as Lord Byron. Later, printings removed Byron's name and added Polidori's name to the title page. The story was an immediate popular success, partly because of the Byron attribution and partly because it exploited the Gothic horror predilections of the public. Polidori transformed the vampire from a character in folklore into the form that is recognized today, an aristocratic fiend who preys among high society. The story has its genesis in the summer of 1816, the year without a summer, when Europe and parts of North America underwent a severe climate abnormality. Lord Byron and his young physician John Polidori were staying at the Villa Diodati by Lake Geneva, and were visited by Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Shelley and Claire Clement, kept indoors by the incessant rain of that wet, ungenial summer. Over 3 days in June the five turned to telling fantastical tales, and then writing their own, fueled by ghost stories such as the Phantasmagoriana. William Beckford's Vatican Quantities of Laudanum. Mary Shelley, in collaboration with Percy Bysshe Shelley, produced what would become Frankenstein. or the modern Prometheus. Polidori was inspired by a fragmentary story of Byron's Fragment of a Novel, 1816, also known as A Fragment, and The Burial, A Fragment, and in 2 or 3 Idle Mornings, produced The Vampyre. Influenced it. Polidori's work had an immense impact on contemporary sensibilities and ran through numerous editions and translations. That influence has extended into the current era, as the text is often even cited as an almost folkloric sources on vampirism. An adaptation appeared in 1820 with Cyprien Berard's novel Lord Ruthven les Vampires, falsely attributed to Charles Nodier, who himself then wrote his own version, Le Vampire, a play which had enormous success and sparked a vampire craze across Europe. This includes operatic adaptations by Heinrich Marschner, See der Vampyre, and Peter Joseph von Lindpaintner, See der Vampyre, both published in the same year and called The Vampire. Nikolai Gogol, Alexandre Dumas and Alexei Tolstoy all produced vampire tales, and themes in Polidori's tale would continue to influence Bram Stoker's Dracula and eventually the whole vampire genre. Dumas makes explicit reference to Lord Ruthven in The Count of Monte Cristo, going so far as to state that his character, the Comtesse G, had been personally acquainted with Lord Ruthven. Theatrical adaptation Sedat. In England, James Plancher's play The Vampire, or The Bride of the Isles was first performed in London in 1820 at the Lyceum Theatre based on Charles Nodier's Le Vampire, which in turn was based on Polidori. Such melodramas were satirized in Ruddigore by Gilbert and Sullivan, 1887. A character called Sir Ruthven must abduct a maiden, or he will die. In 1988, American playwright Tim Kelly created a drawing room adaptation of The Vampire for the stage, popular among community theaters and high school drama clubs. Film adaptation Sedat. The Polidori story was used as the basis for the 1945 film The Vampire's Ghost starring John Abbott as the Lord Ruthven character, Webb Fallon, with the setting changed from England and Greece to Africa. The Vampyre, a soap opera, based on the opera Der Vampyr by Heinrich Marschner and the Polidori story, was filmed and broadcast on BBC Two on December 2, 1992, with the Lord Ruthven character's name changed to Ripley, who is frozen in the late 18th century but revives in modern times and becomes a successful businessman. References Sedat. Bibliography Sedat. Bainbridge, S. Lord Ruthven's Power. Polidori's The Vampire. Doubles and the Byronic Imagination. The Byron Journal. 2006. Barber, Judith. Dr. John William Polidori, author of The Vampire, Imagining Romanticism. Essays on English and Australian Romanticisms. Ed. Deirdre Coleman and Peter Otto. West Cornell, CN. Locust Hill, 1992. 85-110. Blyler, E. F. ed. 3 Gothic novels. The Castle of Otranto, Vathek, The Vampire, and A Fragment of a Novel. Dover, 1966. Boone, Troy, Mark of the Vampire. Arnaud Powell, Sade. Polidori, 19th Century Contexts. 18. 1995. 349-366. Bradley, Ian. 1996. The Complete Annotated Gilbert and Sullivan. Oxford, England. Oxford University Press. ISBN 0-19816503-X. Budge, G. The Vampire. Romantic Metaphysics and the Aristocratic Other. The Gothic Other. Racial and Social Constructions in the Literary Imagination. 2004. Byron, George Gordon. Fragment. The Vampire and Other Tales of the Macabre. Ed. Robert Morrison and Chris Baldock. Oxford. Oxford UP. 1997. 246–251. Dyer, Richard. Children of the Night. Vampirism as Homosexuality and Homosexuality as Vampirism. Sweet Dreams. Sexuality, Gender and Popular Fiction. Ed. Susanna Radstone. London. Lawrence. 1988. 47–72. Gelder, Ken. Reading the Vampire. London. Routledge. 1994. Kelly, Tim J. and John William Polidori. The Vampire. A Penny Dreadful stage thriller in 2 acts. New York. Dramatist Play Service, Inc. 1988. Christensen, A. C. Evolution of the Vampire Genre. From Polidori's The Vampire to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Aalborg University. 2003. Lovecraft, H. P. Supernatural Horror in Literature. The Recluse. No. 1. 1927. pp. 23–59. MacDonald, D. L. Paul Polidori. A Critical Biography of the Author of The Vampire. Toronto. U of Toronto p. 1991. Marshner, H. A. Der Vampyre. Romantic Opera in 2 Acts. 1828. Based on The Vampire, by John Polidori. 1819. Revised by Hans Pfitzner. MRF Records. 1971. Morrill, David. F. Twilight is Not Good for Maidens. Uncle Polidori and the Psychodynamics of Vampirism in Goblin Market. Victorian Poetry. 28.1. Spring 1990. 1–16. Polidori, John. The Vampire and Other Tales of the Macabre. Ed. Robert Morrison and Chris Baldock. Oxford. Oxford Up. 1997. Polidori, John William. The Vampire. And Ernestus Berchtold, or The Modern Oedipus. Collected Fiction of John William Polidori. University of Toronto Press. 1994. Rieger, James. Dr. Polidori and the Genesis of Frankenstein. Studies in English Literature. 3. 1963. 461–472. Rigby, Mayor. Prey to Some Cureless Disquiet. Polidori's Queer Vampire at the Margins of Romanticism. Romanticism on the Net. 36–37. November 2004. February 2005. SENF. C. A. Polidori's The Vampire. Combining the Gothic with Realism. North Dakota Quarterly. Winter. 1988. Skada, Patricia. Vampirism and Plagiarism. Byron's Influence and Polidori's Practice. Studies in Romanticism. 28. Summer 1989. 249–69. Styles. A. and S. Finger. Somnambulism and Trance States in the Works of John William Polidori. Author of The Vampire. European Romantic Review. 2010. Styles. A. and S. Finger. A New Look at Polidori. European Romantic Review. 2010. Switzer. R. Lord Ruthven and the Vampires. The French Review. 1955. External links at The Vampire at Project Gutenberg. The Vampire Public Domain audiobook at LibriVox. Open Library. The Vampire. 1819. Text of Byron's fragmentary story. Fragment of a novel. 1816. At SFF. Net. Goro. Angeline. Physician. Behave Thyself. The New York Times. September 3, 1989. A review of the novel Lord Byron's Doctor by Paul West, which describes the famed knight. Baldini. Kajza C. ed. The Vampire 1816 Multimedia Project, Arizona State University. Spring 2010.